Okay, excellent. We're ready to resume. So instead of having the poster as the backdrop, the event poster as the backdrop here, I've got the visualizer on, and I'm hoping this is going to work because I want to show you something and leave that in the background. It's just let's see. Okay. I know how big it gets. We can make it pretty big. Okay. Barry will hopefully recognize this. I just want it in the background because I think it's, you know how you can get a lot of things done, and this is especially to the younger scholars in the room. You can get a lot of things done in life with determination and persistence, even when things don't go your way. Leonardo da Vinci had as his motto, ostinato rigore, just obstinate rigor. So this is actually something that I have in my office, and I wanted something in the background. And so Barry and I have had many conversations, and one time we were just speaking in my office, and we were talking about something and his work, and he just said, well, it's absurdly, speaking of what he was doing, it's absurdly ambitious and would probably sink without a trace, but it needs to be done. And that sentence, it just kind of like stuck in my head. It was like, yes, well, when you have an idea, when you want to do something, it doesn't really matter. It may be absurdly ambitious, the big picture is. It didn't sink without a trace, of course, but, lots of ambitious ideas may, but it needs to be done. So to all the people in the room who are thinking about whether that big idea that I have, whether the thing that I really want to do and enjoy doing is worth doing, it probably is. And Barry is an exemplar of it. Now, I just need to get my notebook back. So I wanted to ask Barry really just 4 or 5 questions and then open up the floor to Q&A. I've had many conversations with Barry, but also read Barry's interviews, including the one that was conducted by some colleagues, including Patrick, who's one of the co-organizers and the deputy director of CSD. So Patrick Burke interviewed Barry in 2001. And there's that interview, there's other interviews of his, including, and also the response that he has in the volume edited by Rita and Laust. So there's a few things about Barry that, if, with your permission, I can just let them know, because those are things they would find in interviews. And then I want to get to the questions that I really want us to think about. Barry loves chess. Barry is inspired by H.G. Wells. The writing of H.G. Wells has been an important influence in Barry's life. He has had this amazing long journey in this field. He has, held every position. He is an incredibly generous scholar, but also an excellent co-author, and Robert was spot on. It's, if you're co-authoring with him, he's not going to be the person who's late. He is committed and sincere, and that's a pretty incredible and powerful thing to have happen. Barry is interested in the Navy, so there was a BISA conference last year, I think, in Belfast, and and there were all these ships, and one of the receptions of the conference was out near that area. So he's very interested in the Navy. So these are interesting facts about him, and I wanted to sort of just mention them. And in one of his earliest interviews, he said that as a young boy growing up in at the time in Canada, he mentioned that his initial interest in IR was for the embarrassing reason of, the interest in war, the interest in Navy. So that was his original entry point into IR, but he's, moved on from looking at those questions in that way, because at one point he was also a Navy cadet. This is all in his public interviews. To being the person that he is today. So at the very end, Barry, and I'm just mentioning this because maybe you have some background process to think about it, I'd like you to say a few words, like 5 words, just words to describe yourself, but that's not for now. The first question, just keep that thing.
Am I answering these one by one or getting all 5?
Or? No, so I'll ask you a few questions, and we'll just do the questions like the regular way. But at the end, I would like you to say 5 adjectives or words that you would use to describe yourself. So if they keep coming to you in the background as you're mapping your mind, I'm just letting that diffuse, because that's going to be the last question. So, okay. So the first thing that I was curious, reading about your work and being very sympathetic to the big picture approach, is that you've mentioned that you're not loyal to any theory, region, policy sector, or period. That the big picture is a high altitude view. what makes it interesting and desirable is the movability of the big picture, the way in which it can be used to illuminate different things. And the fact that you're something of an intellectual opportunist. You go after the ideas that excite you. All of which sounds liberating and brilliant, and the kind of thing you'd want to do if you wanted to make truly original contributions. But what, if any, are the limitations of the big picture approach for the practitioner of the big picture, but also for others from an outside point of view? What does the big picture not do beyond, obviously, the fact that it doesn't do certain things from a practitioner point of view? So just some reflection on the constraints or limitations of the big picture.
Okay,
Yes,
want
please.
me to answer that
Yes,
now?
please. Yeah, we can hear you.
Obviously, there is some contradiction between doing the big picture and specializing. So, as I say, limitation is kind of the wrong word as far as I'm concerned. It seems to me this is more like a division of labor. These are complementary things that you can choose to do. And I mean, being in academia, I think, is very much being part of a division of labor. Perhaps too much so, which is where the big picture comes in with its strengths. But, I mean, Nitasha and I were talking about this earlier, that particularly since the 20th century, or perhaps the second half of the 20th century, the structural forces driving specialism in all aspects of academia, whether the natural sciences or the social sciences or history or whatever, has been very powerful because there's more and more and more information, more knowledge, if you will, out there to be mastered. So, you know, your Renaissance intellectual who could actually master everything in detail and know pretty much all that was to be known, that's not possible now, and it hasn't been possible for a long time. That means we specialize, that means we become interdependent, but it also means we fall into intellectual silos and only talk to the 10 people around us who are deeply interested in whatever obscure thing we're deeply interested in. And you need to find a balance there. If you get too deep into the silo, you become irrelevant, except to the 10 people you're in there with. If you want to have a wider influence, you need to connect up or across in some way. And this is a problem that is getting worse, or not worse, but more difficult, because knowledge is expanding at a tremendous rate, but our brains and our training are basically static. Right? So we need to work out ways of connecting up all these specialist areas, because if we don't, then we lose that kind of force that the Renaissance intellectual had, that you could master everything and say something that was, in a sense, tuned to the whole. So the benefit of the big picture is doing that. The cost of it is that, you know, you spend your time doing some things and not doing others, and therefore there are certain things that you don't know or are not good at, and you have to make careful judgments about how much you need to know about something in order to be able to speak about it. Right? Because for sure, the specialists will be on your flanks sniping away at whatever errors you have made. So the big picture is only valuable if it adds some kind of, you know, surplus value to what it is that specialists can do by themselves. That's to my mind, the division of labor.
Thank you. And actually, that resonates, and to people in the room, you know, if you think about the way, like a river has a delta, right? The whole area becomes more fertile because the river breaks up into various bits. So there are advantages to making these connections, and possibly with technology, the way that technology is now evolving, the kinds of intense effort over long periods of time that was necessary to build those narrow specialisms, maybe less useful, as opposed to the ability to be able to integratively connect. So I think the time for the big picture in terms of what it can do is very much something that's probably more necessary now than less. So we're seeing perhaps a return to the need for that. And this is something that, as I think, as in academia, we need to think about more seriously. And also, as you said, knowledge making is important. It's important to do it in ways that feel interesting as well as enjoyable. The second question that I had was your point about grand narratives. So I'm one of the generation of academics who, started out with great sympathy to the post-critiques, the post-critiques, the incredulity towards meta-narratives that postmodernists and post-structuralists and all sorts of post-scholars encouraged, that, the meta-narratives are a problem and you have to be incredulous, as Lyotard put it, to them. So it feels like strange and interesting to come to the point where where I'm hearing this view, which I'm not entirely unsympathetic with. And I think that you put it more strongly in the previous session than in the interview where you in your chapter, where you said, don't reject all grand narratives, because that would be politically disempowering. Challenge the dominant ones and generate the better ones, right? So I feel like it is kind of strange, but I can sort of see the sense, but if you can't, you might ask those questions, because some of the ways in which I think political projects currently are developing along these pernicious trajectories is precisely by using the absence of grand narrative. So my question to you is this. So if we have some kind of measured incredulity towards grand narratives, then which ones, if you had a choice, which grand narrative would you most love to dethrone? And which better grand narrative would you most love to generate? Speculative thinking, I know, but you like Wells.
I'm not going to answer that question directly. It's a bit too poisonous, I think. But I would. Let me start by saying I think if you want a good example of the power of the grand narrative and why we are in the situation we are in, then look at what the far right has been doing for the last 20 years. Okay, the far right has done, they never had any of the kind of post-structuralist problems about grand narratives. They've understood all along that grand narratives are a politically powerful tool. The more far-sighted amongst the far-right thinkers could see that liberalism, liberalism has been in a gathering crisis for more than 20 years now, and the far-right has played that intellectual crisis of liberalism extraordinarily well. Right? So they have allowed the liberals to, run their project into a brick wall. And then they have provided the grand narrative which says, okay, this failed, and this is what we now need to do, right? So we need to, stop immigrants, we need to preserve our cultures and civilizationalism, we need to go back to, traditional family values and all of that. And they've also, I think, indeed they have taken over the narrative of civilizations. So the narrative of civilizations now belongs to the right, and they are making hay with it. Okay, so in many parts of the world, this is the leading way of thinking about the world order. If I have a project of any sort, and I'm kind of running out of time to have big projects, but if I had a project of any sort, I would say the most urgent thing is to recover the grand narrative of civilizationalism from the far right, right? Because they don't own that narrative. They have claimed it, and they're the only ones talking about it at the moment, and so effectively it's mobilized on their behalf. But it does seem to me dare I mention the idea of reviving the standard of civilization, but reviving the standard of civilization in a global sense. What does it mean to be civilized now that we all are, as it were? What does that mean? Does that mean that we have to have some kind of collectively civilized relationship with the planet? The far right is not talking about that kind of thing at all. Indeed, some of them are in a completely rejectionist mode of that. So I'm trying to avoid using the word a liberal view of civilizationalism, because I don't think that's what I'm getting at. But a view of civilizationalism that is more a more kind of English school view of it, if you will. What kinds of norms and standards should civilizations have amongst themselves in order to recognize each other as equals? Right? That's not necessarily a liberal project. It doesn't necessarily go against the right-wing project. It could be a way of informing and expanding the right-wing project, and therefore some might say, don't do that. But if we just get the hard view of the current hard right view of civilizationism, it seems to me we're in considerable trouble. So if there was a grand narrative in my mind that was worth playing with, it would be how to bring back the standard of civilization in a global way. In other words, what kind of norms do you have to observe in order to be counted as a member of the civilized community, when that community includes everybody? So this is not the standard of civilization that we once had, where the white West was looking down on the rest of the world and saying, unless you become like us, you are not civilized. We start from the assumption that everybody is civilized, and that seems to be a deep and powerful assumption at the moment that's not going to go away very, very easily. So it's part of the reaction against liberal globalization and the kind of cosmopolitanism and the idea of standardizing cultures across the planet. It's powerful in that sense. And it's open, I think, to being reinterpreted in ways that are not what the right wing is doing now.
Thank you. Barry and I first met at a workshop in Berlin, which was a collaboration between the Free University and Princeton on the future of the West. And it was interesting that when I first heard him present a version of the future of the West paper, the reactions that I had then are actually rather different to now that I know your work a lot more, your thinking, not your work. Your work, of course, I knew before. So yeah, I mean, there are, I think, ideas here for questions. This is a very straightforward question. What advice would you give to somebody who was starting out in the field today? How should they do the social science? Where we're always thinking, what is the social and what is the science in it? But some 2 or 3 kind of nuggets of wisdom advice?
I'm not sure I have 2 or 3 nuggets of wisdom, but I do have one, and I think it's quite a big one. So I'll go with that. And it's a piece of advice I've been giving to students for as long as I can remember, which is follow your interest. Simple as that. In most walks of life, you do not get to follow your interest. If you go to work for a company or something, they will define what it is you do and whether you find it interesting or not. Academia as a career still gives you some, less than it used to, but some scope to make choices about what it is you're going to do, what it is you're going to be interested in. There's no point in going into academia unless you're really interested in something. And you should stick to that because that's what makes an academic life worthwhile. To my mind, the good life is defined by being able to make a living at what you enjoy doing and are good at. Right? It doesn't get better than that. So, if you enjoy making money, then fine, that's a very, very clear path. But if you enjoy studying and writing, and up to a point teaching, probably not so much admin and university politics, but never mind. This is the choice you should make. You should not make instrumental choices about, oh, I'm going to be interested in this because it's fashionable at the moment, and I think, therefore, that will give me my best career prospects. Stick with what interests you and work out then how you make a living at it. Okay? That will give you not necessarily a path to riches, I have to say, but usually you can at least make a go of it, and you will have a well-spent and interesting life, basically spending a lot of time doing what you want to do and making yourself better at doing that. Right? So that, it seems to me, is the opportunity of an academic career, and it's crazy to waste it just doing something for the sake of it being fashionable or because somebody told you to do it or whatever. You will have to be fairly ruthless to do this. You have to stick to your guns. You will have to be strong. But that's my advice.
Thank you. Very useful and rare advice. Don't search for the gap in the literature. Find out what really moves you and then go for it. And don't let people just, don't just think that this is the thing that I should do because everyone else is doing it. Be brave. Think for yourself. Next question, quickly. So you've often mentioned, I mean, the normative point came up earlier, but you've also mentioned often that you have an aversion to philosophy, and aversion is your word there. That you think that, these are essentially questions that are unanswerable. So my question is not the fact that we all have different tastes, de gustibus, non est disputandum. So it's not why you don't like philosophy. It's if you think unanswerable questions are not satisfying enough as an intellectual pursuit, then what makes a good answer for you?
Well, that is, of course, a philosophical question. Since there is a sense in which all questions are unanswerable. Mm-hmm. I don't know, I think this is just more about a particular cast of mind than anything else. I wouldn't have made a good theologian if I'd been born 1,000 years ago. I would not have been interested in angels dancing on pinheads and those kinds of questions. So it's the more practical but structural questions that interest me. I don't know why that is. We could spend a long time discussing how I became what I am, what kind of strange mix of nature and nurture generated me. I don't think that would get us anywhere very, it would produce a biography of kinds, but I'm not sure that would be particularly useful. So I don't know. I was just thinking back to when I was young. Indeed, you can think back to when you were young. It's less work for most of you than it is for me now. I mean, there are just certain kinds of things you like to read and certain kinds of things you don't. You pointed out that I have a rather arcane interest in naval history and warships and all of that kind of stuff. And I was even a sea cadet for a while. Why is that? I don't know. It just appealed to me. So those kinds of things were something, when I came across them, I read them, and I read more of them because I like them. When I was forced to read political theory books and all of that, when I was a student, I just kind of thought, ugh, this is really hard work and totally boring. So these were books I chose not to read. You had to read a certain number of them. I didn't take those kinds of courses. I took more practical courses in history or in political science, which at least was kind of common sense theory in some way. But I don't know, it just didn't appeal to me. So I never engaged with the literature. It is a way of thinking. I have got to know Nicholas Onuf quite well, you'll be surprised to know. Cornelia will be even more surprised to know that he and I are writing a book on, or we have written a book on function and with various other people. So I don't know. I don't have a clearer answer to it than that. There are certain things that appeal to people and certain things that don't. And this kind of way of thinking just never appealed to me. But you know, when I've tried to read Onuf's stuff, and you can't really read his stuff unless you've read all of the stuff that he's talking about. Because he simply goes from, you know, one philosophical narrative to another, jumping around in points. And only when he draws conclusions can I make any sense of what he's saying at all, and then I agree with him. Right? So he and I kind of discovered each other in this odd way, and thought we could write something together. But actually mastering all of that literature just never appealed to me. So failing on my part, if you like.
So yeah, no, makes sense. I mean, you're making your answer is that your aversion is driven by your personal and fundamentally unknowable standpoint and perspective, rather than some kind of value judgment on the sophistry of those who do, or philosophical thinking per se. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sense in which that's what your education is about. You're forced to do a certain number of things because the prevailing wisdom has it that you should know these things, and then you're offered a variety of options of things that you can choose to do, and you choose to do the things that you find more interesting. You suffer through the things that you have to do if you don't find them interesting, but if you do find them interesting, you can do more of that. So in a sense, one's education is structured precisely in that way, to take you down certain pathways that appeal to you and to allow you to say no to the pathways that don't. That, of course, limits you in some ways because there are certain literatures you can't engage with. But I've not found myself short of things to do in life and things to be interested in. So can't do everything, and I choose not to do that.
Second to last question, because the last one's the 5 words. What do you think is or are the biggest challenge or challenges for IR as a field in the years to come? And you can answer that at any level you want. And relatedly, if you were, I've asked you this before, but would you have done anything differently in your IR journey were you to start it again now, having had the experience of your current IR journey?
You're asking that question just in relation to IR?
You can broaden it out to other things.
I mean, take the second one first. I don't have a lot to complain about in terms of my IR career. I've had an interesting career. I have done reasonably well by the standards of the profession. I've met a lot of interesting people and worked with a lot of interesting people and had a lot of interesting conversations and times. I've made an adequate living, kept myself occupied in ways that I enjoy. What's not to like? Why would I have done anything differently? I don't actually think I could have done much more than I have done. So I'm quite proud at having achieved, as it were, a maximum sustainable yield, if you want to put it that way. So I'm not thinking that I missed out on a lot of things that I should have done or anything like that. So I don't know what another pathway would have looked like. Perhaps I made one mistake early on when I'd finished my undergraduate degree at the University of British Columbia, they offered me money to stay on and do a master's degree, and I stupidly accepted, meaning I was being taught by the same people who had taught me as an undergraduate, who didn't have anything really new to say, and therefore the master's degree was pretty uninspiring. I should have gone somewhere else. And indeed, I didn't finish the master's degree. Dirty little secret of my academic career. Incomplete master's degree. But there we are. I managed to survive that. And in terms of the biggest challenges facing international relations, I mean, okay, I'll take myself out on a limb here, which reflects something I've been working on with Matthias Albert and others. It seems to me the biggest challenge to IR, and not only to IR, is climate change. Because by any kind of reasonable projection of where we are heading, the operating conditions that we think of as international relations, which our theories are there for, et cetera, are likely to undergo some fairly enormous changes. I mean, possibly even eliminated altogether. It's quite easy to think of scenarios in which in 50 or 60 years' time, all of that we've been talking about in terms of international relations will be irrelevant because the context is completely different. Okay? And now it seems to me that one of the things that very badly needs to be done, and that IR is quite well placed to be the starting place for, is that the social sciences need to get themselves together, get out of their silos, and start thinking about this in the same way that the natural scientists have been doing for the last 40 or 50 years. So the natural scientists have had, I guess a movement would be the way to call it, called Earth System Science, in which they have got an interdisciplinary network across a wide range of sciences to think on a global scale and to work out the planetary boundaries and tipping points of Earth systems and how to measure them and how to say, when there's a tipping point, if you go beyond this, then things are going to get really unpleasant in the sense the planetary systems will start to break down. And therefore, the conditions of existence in which our civilizations have been for the last 6,000 years will change, possibly quite drastically. There are various individuals within the social sciences whose names you will know, including Robert, who have been talking about this kind of thing. It's not as if the social sciences are not talking about environmentalism and the Anthropocene crisis. But there's no kind of coordinated movement. And the natural scientists have, I think, in some ways reached their limit. They have tried to build what they call the anthroposphere, in other words, the human society. They've tried to build that into their models, but natural scientists are not well equipped to study the human sphere. Their methodology doesn't work very well, or it only takes you so far. And it's not their area of expertise. So it seems to me there's a compelling need. Matthias and Albert and I are calling this world system science for the social sciences and world history to produce something similar to Earth system science, where across disciplines people will be thinking about the anthroposphere, how it works, what drives it, and how it works in conjunction with its planetary environment. Right? There's lots of social science theory that suggests ways of thinking about human society as a whole and how it works and what drives it, but very little of that connects it to the actual planetary system. So it seems to me if IR is looking for a direction, it's very well placed to do that, not because it has good connections with the natural sciences so much, but because IR is, as I was describing earlier, quite multidisciplinary. And therefore, it has good connections with the other disciplines in the social sciences and with world history. And if there's going to be a place where this starts being done, it might well be IR. So that would be my future vision for the discipline.
Thank you. That's incredibly important and something to think about. Noting the point and just sort of italicizing the fact that, yes, actually, natural sciences do collaborate a lot more. Think about all of the new discoveries coming from biophysics to whatever. And in social sciences, we should be able to speak across our languages, but we do much less of it. And when we do it, I think it's very rewarding. I mean, one of the things with climate change is that, don't know if I mentioned, maybe I did mention this to you, is that, attitudes to climate are an important part of whether we get more of it or less of it. And if you look at the correlations, in my work with a psychologist, we did that, the climate change, misogyny, authoritarianism are strongly correlated, we found. So these are not just separate things that are happening out there. There are underlying ways in which these are connected, and it's really important. So the last question now, which is 5 adjectives to any 5. I mean, you can change, tomorrow you might have different 5, but what are the 5 now?
Well, I was thinking this should be a question you put to my wife, but she has wisely left.
Okay. I actually did not note that she's, that's remiss of me because I did want to, that we were going to give you some flowers and I wanted to call her up. Okay.
Okay. Well, these are the 5 I have jotted down. Organized, time-driven, obsessive up to a point, rational, reliable.
Organized, time-driven, rational, obsessive, and reliable. That's pretty solid for if you want to do the kind of work, long-term, amazing work that you've done. So a chance for you to ask some questions. I'll close with a quote from Barry. In a sense, he says, my work is just one damn thing after another. This is from 2001. In a sense, my work is just one damn thing after another, but each thing sets up a new train of questions, and the whole process is driven along and inspired by the interplay of what I write with the work of many others across a wide range of disciplines and specialisms. So I think that's a good summary also of what the canvas that you're working with. So. Questions. There's, Namge has a mic there. So please raise your hand and we'll take, because of time, we'll take 3 in one go. So, Patrick has a microphone as well. So Patrick, just choose 3 hands. Gives you a better place.
Hello, Professor Buzan. Your work obviously is incredibly varied. And the question I have is, amongst different scholars, what has been most misunderstood about your work amongst other scholars?
What has been
most misunderstood?
Misunderstood.
Misunderstood.
What's the thing that people have misunderstood about your work most? Next.
You're going to take these in groups of 3?
Yes.
Okay.
You asked the question of what would you tell people entering this world. What do you tell people like Trump and the other lunatics out there? Is there anything that you can offer which would stop them being so bloody stupid?
Say that again.
Anything that you would offer someone like Trump and other such lunatics, anything that you can offer to stop them being so bloody stupid? Direct quote.
Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much to the Center of Study of Democracy for tonight. I'm extremely honored to be here. My name is Stanislas. I'm focusing on democratic backsliding and computational propaganda. And my question, I suppose, is more practical. When we look at your theory and the global picture, and notably the world society, do you think that the realm of cognition and epistemic security could be studied through this lens as politically agnostic macro phenomena with global security implications, notably in relations to the evolution of our knowledge infrastructures, technology, and information and communication systems? Thank you.
Oh, you want me to translate?
Yeah. Sorry, I can't hear it that way.
So he's saying that, as I understand it, this is fascinating, by the way, but not very easy to summarize. Epistemic security, the way in which computational knowledge and political outcomes.
Relying too much on technology or changing knowledge infrastructures as a global phenomenon, can this be studied through the world society theory?
Okay, so the increasing reliance on technology and the increasing reliance on technology and its effects, can that be studied through world systems? World society view, he's saying. Does that?
Okay. I'll try. I'm not sure that I can think of anything I've done that has been wildly misunderstood. But when you do theoretical work and you just put it out there, people will do things with it that you hadn't thought of and maybe don't approve of, but you don't really have any control over that. So this is a little bit like the way in which religions tend to generate endless numbers of sub-factions of one sort or another by splitting and parsing and refining what it is that's the essence of true belief that you're supposed to hang on to. So there's a sense in which when you do theoretical work, you can't retain control of it. And it would be a bit pointless to try. So I can't think of any big examples of kind of gross misunderstanding. Some of the theoretical work I've done is pretty simple. So, I mean, regional security complex theory is almost Waltzian in its simplicity. So, the terms under which it works and which it doesn't are made perfectly clear, and you can apply it as you like. I don't have any problems with that. I think what would strike me more strongly is that you put some concepts out there, and some of them get taken up and some of them don't. And so it's not a matter of being misunderstood so much as being just ignored. Okay? I mean, securitization theory was a great example of putting a concept out there as Ola did, and having really striking gold dust in the sense that it really just clicked with a lot of people that this was a kind of huge additional way of looking at the whole domain of security. One of the concepts that I put out there that I quite fancied, but which seemed to get no attention at all, although it got an occasional mention, but it was never discussed, and it was very seldom attributed, was interaction capacity. But that seems now to be beginning to take off a bit. I came across a book the other day that has a whole theory of the state. It's a kind of historical approach to the theory of the state, but based on the idea of you can understand different types of states by looking at the prevailing interaction capacity. Wow, I thought. So it takes a long time sometimes. Things may be ignored for a while. But I don't have a big problem, I think, with being misunderstood. I get a lot of feedback from people saying they think I write clearly. Now, in academia, the bar for that is quite low. So I'm not making a big claim here, but I do, to a considerable extent, try and write in plain English, as it were, and not kind of overburdening it with unnecessary jargon. So that may have paid off. If the question about Trump is what would I say to him if I was sat in a room? What is that the question? What advice would I give to him if I were sat in?
The way you look at the world and the idea you've got, what you developed over the years how would you try to apply your theory to get him to change his mind, along with all the other nutcases who seem to have a view of the world which is just crazier than crazy?
I guess if you were charting the trajectory of my thinking on this over the whole span of my career, I would have moved from a rather materialist, American-style, Waltzian position that power is basically about material power, and that I moved away from that and towards a more sociological position, the English school in this case, which is that society and the norms and values that structure society also matter a lot, and quite possibly more, or at least equally. So my reading of Trump would be he doesn't understand the social dimension at all, possibly not even aware of it, just thinks that society doesn't matter. This is sometimes a common view on the right. Margaret Thatcher was often quoted, possibly misquoted, as saying there's no such thing as society. So that's a particular way of thinking. I have no advice to give to somebody who thinks that way, except wake up, look around you, look at what's actually happening and what's actually shaping things. But I've never been in the business of giving policy advice because the sort of work, the people who give policy advice are the people who work on the ground level, looking at what's happening and who have a good sense of who's doing what to whom, where, when, and why. I do not have that, or I have it to a limited extent, but not enough to be in the policy advice business. I mean, only very seldom have I been asked, and it's not the kind of work I go searching for. So basically because the sorts of things that I think about are at somewhat too high a level of abstraction to be relevant to the day-to-day goings-on, unless you're taking a very long view, which people who've got their noses to the policy grindstone are generally not in a good position to do, because they've got to make decisions about what's going on, day to day. Okay, I'm not sure I've got this other question about epistemic security and changing technology and world society. I think the only thing I can usefully say to that is that you need to be quite careful about the kind of presentist thought that somehow we're in a unique world where technology is changing quickly now. Right? It is, okay? No dispute. But there's a certain, egocentric tendency to think that one's own time is the time when everything is happening like this. And it's just not, okay? So basically, if you're thinking about this in military terms, and that, the idea of military revolution, or revolutions in military affairs, which is a term mentioned quite frequently, we have been in a permanent revolution in military affairs, and not just military affairs, but a permanent revolution since the 1840s. Right? So when industrialism began to kick in as globally, not just in Britain, but when it began to kick in globally, and when steam power and all of that began to spread and make a difference to how states related to each other, we have been in a technological revolution since then. It has never stopped. It has never slowed down. Maybe even the bit of it that we are now in is not as spectacular as some of the earlier bits. I mean, if you were around in the middle of the 19th century, when the telegraph and the railway and the steamship were coming in, suddenly the world shrank, from a place that it took half a year to go from one side of it to another, to a place where you could get information from one side to another within a day. Right? That was kind of completely mind-boggling in terms of transforming relations on the planet. And very quickly, the ability to move goods and people around the planet in relatively short periods of time and in large bulk and cheaply and reliable just took off and reached kind of completely unprecedented proportions. So, and then air power, radio, television. I mean, each generation has had its own particular set of things, and I've been around long enough to have lived through several of these at the moment. But I find it impossible to think of the time we're in as unique. We're in a time that has been this way for nearly 2 centuries and is at the moment showing no signs of slowing down. So whatever impact that has on our feelings of security and our feelings of what kind of international system we're in, that's been going on for 2 centuries. Right? So the particular dominant technology changes the flavor of it, but not the basic fact. Okay? We're this is called modernity, right? And that's what we're in, and it might kill us, going back to my earlier remark about the Anthropocene crisis. Right? We might not survive this. We'll have had a hell of a run for 200 years, and then bang. Right? Or we might make it through. Interesting question.
Questions here? No, yes, please. No, but for the recording, it's good to have that.
Thank you, Professor. I'm PhD student at KCL. My name is Husna. I want to ask, you said you are obsessive. Is your obsession on not to be obsessive on something? Because, I mean, I felt like you are encouraging us about not to be restricted by anything. And I think obsession is kind of restriction. And if not so, I mean, what is your obsession about?
Okay, next question. Yes, please.
Hello. I was just wondering if you had a view on whether philosophical pragmatism in some fashion could bridge the gap between the sort of natural discussions that you were talking about and the comment that you made about social sciences needing a more concerted focus on the environment.
The beginning part of that question was...
Whether philosophical pragmatism could be a way of opening up those discussions.
Philosophical pragmatism could open up those discussions. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Katerina Mazzucchelli. I'm a space governance policy researcher. I focus on the impact of infrastructural dependencies in orbit. It's a big issue within European security right now. I follow a lot of Dr. Stoikos's work at LSE Ideas. I'm really fascinated by his use of the English school in orbit. I think it's necessary. In a 2020 article, he recommended future research when he mentioned how we should look at how international society shapes technology and how technology shapes international society. If you have any recommendations for people looking into researching this.
Can we, this might be the last round, can we add one more question, Patrick, here? Are you okay to just add a couple more? Or not? No?
My brain curdles.
Okay, then we do one final round after this. I've got a question here, a question there, and anyone else? One there. Okay, so we've got those three. You can also ask about, like, any of the sessions. This isn't, yeah.
Okay, obsession. Obsession is quite useful, but it can also be dangerous. If that becomes the dominant quality of your personality and your life, you might get a certain amount done, but you probably won't enjoy life all that much, and it makes you difficult company, I would think, being too obsessive. So it's something you need to take in measure. I think if I were to define the nature of obsession in my own life, it would be mainly about, it would be defined by whatever project it is that I've taken on, that once I've kind of got my mind set on something, then there's a degree of obsessiveness about seeing that through. I think I have a pretty good record about finishing stuff. When I die, there will not be kind of cupboards full of half-done manuscripts or anything like that. It will all have been either published or thrown away as unpublishable. So, yes, it's a useful attribute, but also one you need to handle with care, especially as regards how you relate to other people. The philosophical pragmatism question is unanswerable because I have not read the philosophical literature, as I explained, and therefore I don't have the foggiest idea what philosophical pragmatism is or how to answer your question. So I'm going to pass on that. The question on space governance, if I've understood it, you want to know about whether there's literature on international society and technology and international society. Is that what you're looking for?
No, I follow Dr. Stoikos' work, Dimitris Stoikos at LSE Ideas,
Yeah.
who uses ES. And he asked a really interesting and recommended further research in his 2020 article, which is English School Meets STS. And he said that he recommended future research on how international society shapes technology, but also how technology shapes international society. And what recommendations would you have for someone pursuing this?
Interactions between English school and science and technology studies.
Wow. Well, it's an interesting question. I off the top of my head, I can't think that there is much in the way of literature that discusses this at all. I mean, the idea of interaction capacity is one way in there because interaction capacity is very much mediated by the available technologies of the day. So it's possible you could build on that, looking at technologies that influence and presumably facilitate or increase interaction capacity. So it would be a way of telling the story of international society, to look at how international society has grown because interaction capacity has improved because of technological innovations over the last couple of centuries. That would probably put you on similar ground to the book I mentioned about state theory, whose name and authors I cannot immediately recall, but it seems to me that kind of virgin territory. If I don't know, Cornelia, can you think of anything? Has anybody done anything in the English school on this? I don't think so.
Yes, it depends what you mean by which technology and what you mean by international society. Do you mean the increase in cooperative relations or the increase in...
Actually, I was going to suggest to carry on that conversation later because it seems like a more involved conversation where both of you would benefit from, or maybe all three of you, so that we go on to the next round of questions and then we have a...
I think we're at 8.
Yes, exactly. So we've already got the last 3 questions identified. We just do that and then you get to speak to each other at length. Sorry?
You're making it work very hard. You want more questions?
No, Barry already said that he's going to do 3 more questions, yes.
Yeah, I'll deal with 3 more.
3 more and then we're done.
And then
Yes.
I've earned a glass of wine.
Absolutely. You have earned more than a glass of wine. Yes, please.
2 if you insist.
Professor Buzan, sorry to be in the way to your glass of wine, but a very short question on climate change, since you mentioned that as one of the major challenges today. Do you think climate should really be securitized, and what form would that take in the populist era that we are seeing, which is on the rise? And if so, what are the downsides? Would you say that climate should rather not be securitized?
Okay. Yeah. One
Hello,
question here.
thank you so much for your talk. My question ties back to the ideas you spoke about to do with modernity, and it's about the place of history that we find ourselves in. You've written extensively about periodization, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on the idea of periodization and how you would characterize the moment we find ourselves in history. So what are the different periods and temporal demarcations you would place us in today?
Okay. Question about periodization, and then one final one there. Yes, thank you.
My name is Wayne Raposo. I am an older student at the master's program at King's. I'm a corporate solicitor and I work at a hedge fund in my normal day job. And I follow IR as a matter of risk and interest. So 2 comments related. The first is a thanks to you and your writings. In the work I come across, I often deal with heads of state and foreign ministers, or the people one notch below it. And they fully appreciate, as I do, the immense credence and sincerity by which you approach the views of IR of other regions of the world. It's very, very sincere and captivating, and I thought I would sort of thank you for all the writings you've done in that. I probably read all of them. But secondly, in the English school as you see it, in the road ahead, how would you view the role of exceptionalism in state affairs for non-Western states?
Say that again?
How do you view the role of exceptionalism in the context of the epistemology and civilizational constructs of non-Western states as being a factor to study and to evolve in sort of the evolution of the English school?
Okay. Right. Securitized climate change or not? That's an interesting question. As you're no doubt aware, there's been quite a long argument about this, or discussion about this, and back towards the end of the last century, the dominant view was don't, right? Because the idea was that if you securitized the environment, then securitization basically meant militarization. And there was a desire not to go down that path. There were others who always argued, yeah, but climate change is going to produce security issues because of migration and drought and blah, 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 blah. So that's been back and forth for a long time. I guess my own position at the moment would be that things are reaching such a serious state of being that if we can't securitize climate change, then we are buggered, okay? Because it just seems to me that we're running out of time. And therefore the urgency, the priority that you get from securitizing, that's just got to be brought into play at this point, because otherwise the various kinds of resistances and obstructions are never going to be overcome. This is not going to produce a pretty picture, and so I stay with the original argument that Ola and I made, that you shouldn't seek securitization as a preferred position because there are lots of negatives about it. But at this point, it seems to me that's the only way to go. So I think in short, I think we should. How best to do that? that's a long discussion. But if that's the direction you're wanting to go in, let me encourage you. In terms of the periodization question, I kind of dealt with that in the book called Timelines for Modernity. So I'm not at all in favor of the kind of Eurocentric or West-centric system of periodizing according to when there were big world wars or just wars driven by the Western powers. That's not a periodization system that anybody thought about. It just happened. It was a convenient way to divide time up, and it's now hugely institutionalized. So, you look at the way history books are written, they're all written kind of between wars, and IR thinks in this way as well. I think we need to think in a more global way, so the periodization I've suggested has its first big date is the 1840s, which is when the first round of modernizers really began to take off and have a global impact. And this created a core periphery world in which a very small group of mainly Western countries, but also including Japan, which was amongst the first round modernizers, although not generally credited as such. That's a kind of big starting date. The next big date in my periodization would be the 1970s, which is when a second round of industrialization and modernization begins to take off in East Asia, because it's an amazing phenomenon that the first round modernizers, a handful of states really, they got going between the 1840s and 1870s, and then nothing, 100 years, nothing, right? So that small group of countries ran the world. What else could they do? They had all the wealth and power, and nobody else was able to follow them. Modernization is not easy. So the second round of modernization didn't really begin until the 1970s, when the Asian tigers and China and others began to pitch in. So we're now in the middle of that second round of modernization. It doesn't look like it's going to get us to universal modernization, but it's a huge change. So the core of modern states has become much bigger and much more civilizationally and culturally diverse than it was before. That seems to me to be a major turning point. We are, well, in subsequent work, I would have argued that the Western world order has been declining since the 1970s. Not that the West has been declining in any absolute sense, but in a relative sense, it's been declining. And the ability of the West to dominate the world, it seems to me, can now be very handily dated to last year, right? So last year, the West ceased to exist, right? Trump basically destroyed the West as a player in world politics, and we are living in quite a different world order. So my kinds of periodizations would hinge on those kinds of things. It's a more kind of global international relations type of periodization that centers on the relationship between core and periphery, how that came about, how it endured for so long, and how it has been now unraveled. So you've got a book to read if you want there. Then the English school and exceptionalism and civilizationalism. I've kind of answered this already, I think. So I'm just going to say the same thing over again and fairly briefly, which is that civilizationalism as a philosophy is about exceptionalism. It's basically the statement, we do not want to be globalized, we do not want to have any kind of universal standards or norms that say what our culture must be. Each culture wants to go its own way and be judged by its own standards and not interfered in by other cultures. That's very much the far right line on civilizationalism. So civilizationalism and exceptionalism go together. The question, and if you want a really extreme version of that, but set out in a very thoughtful and coherent way, have a look at some of Alexander Dugin's work. Okay? So he sets this, I mean, dare I mention the name of Alexander Dugin? Probably not. But he sets out that vision with great clarity. And he does not, interestingly, at least in the works of his that I've read, he does not rule out the idea that these very exceptionalist civilizations might actually get on with each other in a coexistence sort of way. He says they might fight as well, but he doesn't rule out the coexistence possibility. And that, to me, would be the place where the English school comes into play and where you say, okay, allowing that these are exceptionalist civilizations and very strongly wanting to be autonomous and self-contained and not interfered with in any way, what would the standard of civilization amongst them be? Right? What kinds of things could they recognize? Could they, for example, recognize that having a duty of care towards the planet sufficient to keep it within the bounds of the Holocene climate on which all of our civilizations depend? Would that be a reasonable a kind of shared value amongst even highly exceptionalist civilizations? Quite possibly. And one could think of others. So it seems to me that's a fruitful line to think down. And in that sense, Alexander Dugin's work is not a bad place to start because he gives the opening, and you can't get more extreme far right than his. So even in that degree of far rightness, there's a possibility.
Thank you very much, Barry. We're going to do 4 things now. 1, I absolutely need to begin by thanking everyone in the room. Barry, I'm going to thank you last because there's a ceremony here. Thank you everyone for being here. This has been an incredibly wonderful evening full of thought-provoking ideas and discussions. I want to thank Patrick and Namge. And these guys have been stars, and thank you so much, Patrick. Really, thank you. Wouldn't have been possible without you. Also, I want to thank Theo, Leon, everyone else who's here and who's been a part of this. Next, I want to, I'm deeply grateful to and appreciative of the effort of the panelists, of Rita and everyone in the panel. Please do have a look at the book because it's just come out, so you don't, you may not be completely familiar, but the effort and the detail with which they explain to you the relevant debates and the key points. Please do go and read the book. There is a flyer for a 20% discount on each of the seats there. And of course, feel free to reach out afterwards to any of us. And so thank you very much. And once we've done the final applause, and before we go to the food and drinks, I'd like all the panelists to come up here for us to get like a picture with you all as well, because we've got separate pictures. But the thing that I want to do before that, and you can tell, I think, algorithmically, is we want to celebrate you, Barry, and we've got something for you, so we just want to sort of give you that.
Wow.
You would be surprised how and I didn't know your favorite flowers or anything, but wow, there's that. Okay. And also, this is for chess. It's It's got a chest connection, so I think you'll appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you so much. Very kind.
So,